Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Lucy Fox Show. This is my channel and podcast. So, in today's episode, and we're going to dive right in, I want to share with you some personal stories about healing my addictive behaviors and patterns. Now, it's difficult when we hear the word addiction because our heads go straight to alcoholics, junkies, and people who are in rehab. And we kind of separate ourselves from that and think, well, if I'm not that, then it's just self-sabotage, or just these behaviors are just, just the thing I do to relax. And what I now know, as being a root cause therapist, and a lot of the work I've done on trauma, a lot of the studies and research I've been doing around trauma and addiction, and all of the work of the legend that is Gabor Mate, I just know that addiction isn't just reserved for the alcoholics and junkies of the world, and that the nature of addiction on a chemical level, on an emotional level, but also on, primarily on a nervous system level, is that addiction isn't just if you're over here, you're addicted, and if you're over here, you're not. But addiction, much like trauma, much like neurodiversity, exists on a spectrum. It exists on a scale, and the scale of severity depends on what we seek or need from the vice, right? But ultimately, they are the same thing. And so what I'm sharing with you today is from the perspective of somebody that, and I am going to use the word battled and struggled with various behaviors and patterns for a long, long time, and really only saw the light and came through each of these in the last 5 years. So let's go back to the beginning of where it started, because often what we think is that we look at one individual habit or behavior and we say that is the thing that I'm addicted to, or that is the behavior I'm addicted to. And what I know, looking at my own life and with the clients that I work with all the time, is that addiction switching happens constantly and is actually a really normal part of any kind of escapism process. So I'm going to take you back to the beginning of my journey, and I've talked about some of this before when I've talked about healing trauma. So I'm going to look at it from the perspective of the addictional behavior rather than necessarily the root cause trauma that was attached to it. But I think what's just really important for you to reference and for you to know is that all addictions are, and not to trivialize them, but all addictions are is the compulsion to escape. The compulsions to escape feeling, or the compulsion to escape feeling too much. Sometimes feeling too little, right? But ultimately, most coping mechanisms, survival strategies, addictions, and that's what addictions are, right? They're coping mechanisms, they're survival strategies. They are a compulsion to escape from the feelings we feel inside of us, or the lack of feeling inside of us. And we end up finding strategies outside of us that allow us to either feel something or allow us to feel nothing. And usually it's a combination of both. So looking at my life, the first survival strategy or coping mechanism that developed for me, which is the most socially acceptable, which is the most widely available, is food. And mine actually started in a more disordered pattern, in that when I was much younger, I would limit and control how much I ate. And then I would find myself having some epic binges. And this probably started, as I've been doing the therapy work and doing the reflective work, I can see this started probably when I was actually in the back end of primary school. I packed mine and my sister's lunches for primary school, and I probably just didn't give myself enough food. Now, I probably was a fussy eater. So I'm also conscious that, as I've got older, as I've peeled away protective layers of emotions and behaviors, I've begun to understand how sensitive I am, how easily overloaded my senses get. So I get sensory overload a lot, not with the obvious things like with work or email box or whatever, but I get them with smells, I get them with sounds, I get them with vibration. So I'm a very sensitive person. And so if I think back to my childhood when I wouldn't have had this conscious understanding or knowledge, I know that I will have been looking for something outside of me to control, at the same time as probably being a fussy eater because of my own sensory issues, right? So I actually have conscious memory of having a yellow and green lunchbox, and I can't believe I even remember this. A yellow and green lunchbox, and I would pack myself like half a jam sandwich. Now, anyone that follows my recent content knows I'm a celiac, but I did not know this when I was 11. I found out when I was like 25. So I would pack myself like half a jam sandwich and a piece of fruit. And then I would find myself later in the afternoon binging on sugar when I was at home. And we were relatively left to our own devices as children. My dad was self-employed and worked from home. My mum worked a full-time job as a teacher. And when my brother was born, we had an amazing, your mother's helper, or whatever word vibes with you. And she was freaking awesome. But obviously 3 kids is a lot to look after. And so I think I was kind of left to my own devices. And as a very kind of like highly functioning kid, I don't think I questioned it. I don't think they questioned it. This behavior then evolved throughout high school, and at the back end of high school, early university years became, and by the way, there were lots of binges in here. Like I started going to the gym when I was 14 and then would eat like 4 chocolate bars from Smith's. Or I would go to I would work out for 2 hours a day, and then on a Friday I would eat like a whole cheesecake. Like, it was bizarre behavior that I just, again, focused and fixated on the behavior that I thought, this is what's wrong with me. I've got a problem with food. This then continued and perpetuated into my late teens and early university years. And when I went to university, I think I've shared with you before that an intervention was had my first year of university. And because I was so underweight, my eating had become very disordered, very irrational, very controlled. And there were no binges at this point. So this was actually in a season where the binging had stopped, and what had replaced it was extreme control, 2-hour workouts, 20,000 steps a day, and this is like time. This is before Apple Watches, right? And what that really meant for me was some sense of control when I felt completely out of control. And I can see that now looking back in hindsight. I went to university with a boyfriend at home, actually probably closer to my family than I probably realized, desperately wanted independence, village girl life, desperately wants to grow and live in the big city. And I actually think it was, again, just a way to control feelings of overwhelm, unprocessed emotions of anxiety, feeling the pressure to achieve, the pressure to be, and not from anyone in particular, but just the generalized social pressure to be good at everything. And equally just wanting to be loved and seen. And I think it's so obvious to me now. These wounds are so obvious. But at the time, you feel so trapped in the behavior, and that behavior feels such a big part of your identity that you have no idea how you move through it. And so then my food behaviors, they evolved into a season of my life we'll call party season. And party season involved some class A drugs quite frequently, and quite a lot of them, and involved alcohol in a very depressing way, in that I used it to depress myself. So I would use the drugs to take me up and the alcohol to bring me down. And this kind of started a cycle of where I really felt the experience of what it feels like to chemically jump and manipulate yourself up and down. So much like when people take an energy drink or a coffee, they're like, woof, whoosh. And then when they have a glass of wine, they feel, it was that kind of behavior. And this is where this really started for the first time. And this is where I think it's really important to know. And I'm going to do a load of podcasts on addiction, as it's just something that I'm really called to teach on, talk about, and continue to develop on. But what's really important to note with most addictions is that the feeling that we normally are chasing or compulsively seeking is escape. And another word for that would be relief, right? And so it never really matters what the cycle is or what the behavior is. If at the end of it, you feel relief, if there's a compulsion or obsession, and then when something happens or you reach the end goal, like was talking to a client the other night, and she has an overwhelming need to answer all of her emails every single day, and she'll stay up super late to do it. But when she's done it, she feels this overwhelming sense of relief that feels almost so addictive. That's what keeps her in this cycle. And so this is why addiction is not about a list of things, much like trauma isn't about a list of things. It's about the experience of what's happening inside of us. And so my food relationship kind of took a wayside while I kind of enjoyed the drugs and alcohol in my party season. I found competing kind of in this window around the same time. So then there was the extremities of spaces, a bikini fitness model. So being in a competitive environment, and look, guys, I'm a massive fan of the bodybuilding industry. My husband's a bodybuilder. Most of my ex-boyfriends have been bodybuilders in some capacity. But this, for me at this time, it found me at a problematic time to begin with. Then later on, my relationship with food evolved even more when I got really sick in 2012, 2013. So I had a breast implant rupture. I have talked about this before. This was a really difficult time for me emotionally. The breast implants were a decision I'd made to help me support my sense of body image and self-esteem. And again, whenever we put pressure outside of ourselves, we're always relying on the outside thing. And so this time became quite difficult for me emotionally, but also what then happened chemically was, real damage to my gut, damage to my liver, mass load of intolerances, chemical sensitivity. And so I actually had to go on an extreme elimination protocol, and I had to go keto for 6 months. And what this did was completely change my relationship with food, and not necessarily in a good way either, right? Because it just meant the obsession changed from either the starving and the binging cycle to the extreme control, or orthorexia, you could call it, of exactly what I ate and when I ate it and how I ate it and what it was doing. And so it just became the next thing to fixate on, the next thing to hyper-focus on, the next thing to get relief, because if I controlled and manipulated this thing, then I was relieved, right? And this cycle continued. Now, in this time, like I've said, there was a party season. When I got sick, the party season ended. There were a few a few good nights out after that, but it really was like called time on. There was also a season of promiscuity, and I say this with no shame as somebody who has worked through her shame on this. Now, when women tend to be promiscuous, and I can only speak for women because I am a woman and most of my studying is done on women, is when women are more promiscuous, it's seeking a sense of control or power. It's normally a sense of trying to take our power back from where we felt powerless, where we get to be the one in charge, where we get to be the one that makes a decision for ourselves. It's normally actually the reason why it's so risky is obviously, the practical things here, right? But why it's so risky is what we're doing is we're subjecting ourselves again to outside validation. We're subjecting ourselves again to being vulnerable with the wrong people in the wrong environment. But promiscuity, what it does is it gives this false illusion of power. And obviously, sex is amazing, right? It's one of the best things. If you have great sex, one of the best things on the planet. But what that relief is, right? The relief from having sex or an orgasm is so addictive, right? You can chase that too. So there was a season of that. There was then a season of alcohol. And the worst season I experienced with alcohol was in two phases. So one was when, I don't remember my exact age, but I remember where I lived. I know that sounds weird. So many of you will relate to that. You were like, oh, I don't remember how old I was or what was happening, but I know which house I was in or I know what job I had. And there's a season with alcohol where I was drinking in the day. And it was and it was just this feeling of like obsessing about it. I would think about it all the time. I would just and it would only be like one drink, right? So it wasn't like I was drinking a whole bottle of wine. But I would just be like thinking about it. It would ruminate. It would spin in my head. I'd need it. I'd have the drink and then I'd feel this overwhelming sense of remorse. Like, what am I doing? I run my own business. I'm in health and wellness. Why the fuck am I having an alcoholic drink at 3 p.m. on a Tuesday? And I think what I can now see looking back is this was actually after I'd had my last binge with food. So again, I'm going to talk about this more in future episodes. The feeling that I got from binging was the same feeling I got from having a drink at 3 p.m. in the afternoon. And that was just a feeling of release or relief and escape. And often when there are unfelt feelings and unprocessed emotions in the nervous system, they present themselves in such cryptic ways we don't even know they're there. Like, I would never have said to you I was an anxious person. I would never have said to you that I was overwhelmed. I would never have said that I had this kind of like bubbling anxiety feels like the only word I can really use. This bubbling just sense of discomfort and feeling uncomfortable in my own skin. But because I had programmed that when I feel like this, I reach outside of myself, I wasn't even aware I was feeling those emotions because they were so unconscious at this point, right? This cycle was so unconscious. Feel uncomfortable things, boom, instant reach, instant ruminate, instant reach for the food, reach for the drink, reach for the, nowadays could be reaching for your phone, reaching for TV, reaching for a gummy, whatever, that it became so unconscious, I wasn't even aware of what was causing it. And this is what I see with most of my clients is they feel so trapped and so powerless to the addictions that have them trapped, whether it's emotional eating, overworking, obsessing about one thing and then fixating on the next. And the reason for it all is the feelings that you are trying to avoid. And so what I often see with my clients and what I definitely saw with me is as I did the inner work to peel away the layers of beliefs, the layers of behaviors, we got closer to the real feelings. And when those real feelings surface, the answer then in a safe environment is to allow yourself to feel and process those things like I do with my clients inside root cause therapy, right? We go straight to the unconscious and we're able to process them and deal with them. But the challenge is, unless we are really fucking willing and really absolutely done and really want to change, and I'm not saying this like you don't want it. You like the idea of it. You would like to stop emotion eating. You would like to stop obsessing or overthinking or people pleasing. You would like to. It would be good. Your life would be better. But on an unconscious level, where would that be not a problem for you? Like, where would that be problematic if you stop that behavior? What would you have to face? What would you have to deal with? What would you have to experience? Withdrawal symptoms are not just reserved for drugs and alcohol. Withdrawal symptoms show up, in terms of chemical release from addiction. Absolutely, there's one side of it. But when we withdraw from something, when we remove something, this is why the cold turkey concept doesn't work. It's why abstinence has a place, but it's not the thing, is that then we are faced with the emotions that led us to the pattern or the habit in the first place. And if we're not in the right emotional supportive environment. So you're not working with a coach, you're not working with a therapist, you're not in a program, you're not doing something. It's going to feel, one, impossible because you have no idea how to process those emotions. Because if you already did, you would have already done it, right? So even if you know the how and the logic, it's feeling safe enough to sit with those feelings and emotions and allow them to come up, allow them to move through you. And if we don't feel like that, then you can like the idea of change, you can want the change, you can desire the change, you can have a vision of your future where that is no longer part of it. But the unconscious is running so aggressively and so fast and so intensely. 95% of who you are is programmed in the subconscious and unconscious. And so you've only got 5% fighting 95%. So this is why it's not about willpower. It's why it's not a choice. It's why it's not about the drug or the alcohol or the food or the television or the sex or the mushroom gummies or whatever it is, or the workaholism or the hustle culture. Like, it's never about what it's about. And anybody that is suffering from addiction is not doing it out of choice and is not broken and is not wrong and does not have something wrong with them, right? And it's not that they don't care about you if you are somebody who's partnered with them. It is because their unconscious chemical programming plus combined with their unconscious emotional programming physically makes it almost impossible for them to refrain, to stop, or to stay stopped. I'm going to be talking in future episodes about where detox has a place, where rehab has a place, where programs have a place, where 12 steps has a place, and it all has a place, right? But here's what is missing from so much of the literature, not in the work of the fabulous Gabe Mate, but what is missing so much in the way society and culture views addiction. And this is what led to a lot of my shame, right? Is we see it as, unless you meet these certain criteria, there's something wrong with you. So let's say you're feeling these uncomfortable feelings, you're feeling these anxious things when you're 5 or 6, and you find biscuits in the biscuit tin as a way to release that. Again, this is not conscious, this is happening in the unconscious. You look for something outside of you to soothe something inside of you. This then continues and you find something else. You find cigarettes, you then find smoking weed, you then find drinking alcohol, you then find Class A drugs, you then find high performing at work, you then find video games, right? You then find, even personal development can be super toxic, right? It's never about the behavior itself, and it's also always about how we use it. And let's say this continues. Well, it started with uncomfortable feelings. So when we have those uncomfortable feelings, we then have a behavior. If the behavior isn't making us feel good about our life, so it's a behavior that people shame us for, so drugs, cigarettes, oh, why do you still smoke? Oh, why'd you take drugs? Oh, God, you drink all the time. Or it's led to negative consequences like we've gained lots of weight, and we don't feel good about ourselves, or we're always hungover, or we never quite get healthy because we're smoking too much, right? Then that leads to feelings of shame and guilt, right? And then society throws on top, oh, they're junkies, they're alcoholics, they're just addicts. It's a choice. Why can't they change? Everything's wrong with the drugs and wrong with them. Adds to the shame. So then we're then layered with so much our own shame about the behaviors and the consequences, then societal and cultural shame. And we started with uncomfortable feelings in the first place, right? Some of which were probably shame. And as a result, we just end up in this massive shame guilt spiral, right? The shame cycle. And so tell me how in any world, somebody who is living in a cycle of shame and a cycle of low self-worth and in a cycle of like, there's something wrong with me, I'm broken, why can't I choose? Why can't I change? Tell me how in any reality that person is going to be able to put down that behavior, not pick up another one, and magically get their life together. And the answer is nowhere. And so this is why you see addiction switching so much of the time, is we'll figure out how to put one down and then we'll pick one up. And when the alcohol got put down for me, workaholism got picked up. High performance got picked up. This is a trait I've had my entire life. Overachievement was something to focus on. I remember I overstudied and over-revised for my exams like an obsessive freak. I went through the stage of answering all my emails that day and obsessing if they weren't answered. Personal development, you can get obsessed with being the most positive person in the room, the most developed person in the room. And again, it's never about the thing itself. You can be obsessed with working out, you can be obsessed with eating healthy, but if either the feeling or the chase behind it is a sense of compulsion or obsession, it's an addiction. Or if it comes with consequences that you don't always love, so this feeling of if you don't work out, you get anxious, or if you don't have a cigarette, you feel stressed, or you actually eat really healthily, but you're still eating too much, then you're overweight. All of these things, it's never about the behavior itself, and it's always about what's driving it, so the energy behind it, and subsequently the consequences. So when we tell people or try to shame people into change, change. And this is where I have a problem with 12-step programs. Don't get me wrong, there's good elements to it. We've got the community piece, you've got the sense of hope, but there's so much shame. Stand up and say you're an addict, right? And look, don't get me wrong, radical honesty is a really big part of healing, and awareness is totally the first step. But having to reaffirm that you're an addict for 20 years doesn't really give you a fat shot at changing, right? It doesn't give you an opportunity to create a new identity as somebody who doesn't have addictive behaviors. And this is why we see a lot of people addiction switching, right? So I have addiction switched through food, money, promiscuity, drugs, alcohol, achievement, workaholism, personal development. There's probably 100 more in there, right? Money was a massive one. We'll do a whole thing on addiction to money and spending and debt and all that stuff. But what I know for sure now, as somebody who is able to witness when compulsive behaviors come up, and somebody who doesn't feel I have any compulsions that cause me discomfort or pain or anything that feels obsessive, and somebody who is in a place in life where I am comfortable, and I've used that word because I think everyone's perception of what that is different, but who is financially well, who is physically well, who is emotionally well, who is mentally well, who is, at a healthy weight, who, will have a lovely glass of wine when she wants one. And everything in my life feels like choice. Now, sure, the unconscious is always programmed, so it's just about what's programmed, right? But I don't feel like there are behaviors and compulsions that are pulling me. I know that the biggest part of that was being able to, one, build enough capacity inside my nervous system through doing healing work to be able to feel the uncomfortable feelings that were underneath, and two, to be able to create an identity where those things were no longer part of my identity. And so much of the traditional addiction literature, programming, narratives, societal, cultural, even you don't even realize how biased you are until you meet somebody who's got an addictive problem, and then you're like, you catch yourself. Great example. I went to a shop this morning to drop off a vintage parcel. I've literally vintage. I went through this massive clear out this year of just like, who do I want to be? What do I want to wear? What do I want to feel like? And I just got rid of loads of stuff, like really nice designer stuff too. And I vinted this pair of shoes. I worn them like twice. Again, spending. I went through a spending cycle where I was obsessed with certain brands and what would come from those brands. And I had to have sets, and it was a whole thing because, again, it gave me a sense of relief, right? Shopping's such a great example of this. You scroll, you put things in your basket, you take them out, and then you spend them, you buy them, you wait for them, they arrive, you get the hit of them, and then it's gone. Yeah. And so this is how they can be destructive. So even though you could be buying £5 things, and in fact, I have a client who got a little bit obsessed with Shein and Temu, and she's like, my house is fucking full of clutter. Now what? And that's because it was never about the stuff from Shein and Temu. It was all about what she got to feel in that experience of the spending, of the scrolling, of the purchasing. So anyway, I digress. A huge part of my healing was, one, having the nervous system capacity to feel all the feelings I hadn't felt, to feel all the emotions as they came up and have the capacity to deal with that and the skills and tools to process them, and be able to create and define a new identity for myself. And had I not had that, I can see how I wouldn't have been able to come out of these addictive patterns. So a story actually from today, which is super interesting, is I went to the shop, been vinting my whole life, cleared out my wardrobe, went on a whole spree of like, what do I want to wear? Who do I want to be? What's the vibe for me moving forward? And I went to the shop this morning to drop off the vintage parcel. And the woman who works in the shop, I know she's 32 weeks pregnant because she told me the last time I was there, which was like a week ago. And she was outside smoking. And I felt this just like overwhelming inner judgment rise up inside of me of like, how could you do that? You're bringing new life into the world. Judging her for her behavior, right? And as the vintage parcel and I walked away, I was able to allow myself to release the judgment and really see her with compassion. And this takes work, right? Don't get me wrong. This isn't an everyday thing. And what I recognized was what I've been teaching, what I'm talking about, what I'm sharing with you today, is that what if her whole life has been hard and a struggle, and she has all these complicated and unprocessed emotions inside of her that she has been able to escape from through alcohol, maybe through drugs, maybe through working, maybe through chocolate, maybe through cigarettes, her whole life. And she found herself, whether it was expectedly or unexpectedly pregnant, where so many of those tools she can no longer use. What happens? Well, she's going to feel like she's under threat. She's going to feel like she's in danger. Her nervous system is going to act out. It's going to kick out. It's going to argue. It's going to fight. The voices are going to get louder. The cravings are going to get worse. The urges are going to get bigger because she's had to remove so many of her survival strategies. And maybe having one cigarette roll up a day is her version of abstinence, is her version of trying to find a new way. Now, if the society was normalizing the narrative that when we're addicted to something, it's normally because there's root cause trauma or unprocessed emotions or unfelt experiences, then we would be in a different story, because she would be going to the right places, asking for the right help and saying, hey, listen, I do actually want to stop all these things. Found out I'm pregnant, have no idea how to go cold turkey on them all because I feel like I'm going to go crazy and I'm going to go insane. And I can relate to the trying to willpower my way, white knuckle abstinence my way through it. Again, why I find the abstinence concept of 12 steps problematic in some cases, because most addictions are created as survival strategies or coping mechanisms. And so if you remove the survival strategy or the coping mechanism, then suddenly you put your nervous system back into a threat level, back into a sense of danger. And so unless you are ready to be able to help the nervous system process that emotion in real time and be in the right program or the coach or the therapist or whatever, like I said, it's a very difficult thing when you take away the survival strategy. And this is where addiction switching shows up so much. You know, one of the clients that I have had a bit of a problem with purchasing, and look, money's a real thing, right? The way we spend, the way we do anything. And she had this real thing with Temu and Shein. And she would just compulsively buy £8 things and £16 things. And because there was a long shipping time, there's almost the dopamine release of like waiting and waiting and waiting. And they'd arrive and she'd be like, and then she'd be on to the next. And so look, dopamine plays a massive part in addiction for sure. It's why neurodiversity in addiction has massive connections for sure. But is it the whole story? No. You know, our dopamine is when we're experiencing something painful. We reach for something that creates a lot of dopamine. It takes away the pain, right? It's neurotransmitters take away pain. And we go, oh, wait, let's do this whenever we feel pain. And then it's programmed. Do it 2 or 3 times, and then it's automatic. And so as much as dopamine and chemistry plays a part in addiction, plays a part in trauma, plays a part in neurodiversity, so does trauma, so does healing, so does growth. And so if you right now are feeling like you're facing addictive tendencies, behaviors, and patterns that you want to change, and this is a really important part, that you want to change, you have to want to, right? And by want to, I don't mean unconsciously want to. I mean, you have to consciously, with any power that you do have, actually want to change it. And if you don't, just fucking own that, by the way. Just own that. Like I remember saying to my therapist 4 years ago, maybe, I'm actually not ready to give up having a glass of wine most days. And she said, well, don't then. And it was one of the most empowering things she could have ever said to me. But also my level of self-awareness then to know I'm not ready to let go of this survival strategy because I'm not sure I'm able to deal with what's underneath. That's what we're saying when we're saying I don't want it. And so I just want you to be really aware that if you find yourself saying, I want it, I want it, I want it, and then you just don't seem to take any moves forward, get real with yourself about whether you do want it or whether or not the perception is there'll be danger or threat or fear or some uncomfortable emotion on the other side that you're not quite ready to deal with yet. Now, look, my story with addiction probably isn't over. And do I know if it ever ends? You know, once something's programmed on a chemical level, it kind of always lives there. And sure, will there be the nature at some point to go into maybe another addictive tendency? Maybe it'll be cleaning, right? Who knows? Everyone who knows me is laughing. Maybe it'll be cooking. Maybe it'll be fashion design. Maybe it could be anything, right? But what the important thing I'll always witness is what's the emotion that's driving this compulsion? And if the emotion that's driving this compulsion, if this is being driven by any compulsion, that's my time and my warning sign to look at what is happening underneath, to look at what's coming up for me and to go and do the work to figure out what that is if I'm not sure, and to be able to feel that, process that, and move through that. Because until I do, I'm always going to be seeking something outside of myself to feel better inside of myself. And that's ultimately what addiction is. And so my journey of healing my addiction, my behaviors and my patterns and the cycles that kept me stuck was being willing to go within, being ready to go within, wanting to go within, and to heal all the root cause of the trauma, the emotions and the experiences, so that I no longer needed things on the outside of me to manipulate how I felt, to give me relief, to give me escape, because I could create that inside of myself anytime I like. And I don't say that to impress you, but to really demonstrate that as somebody who has found herself deep in debt, somebody who found herself in a drug hole, somebody who's found herself in what felt like psychosis with food, alcohol, and God, workaholism, to now be in a place where everything feels like I have real freedom of choice, it is absolutely fucking worth it. And shaming yourself because of your behavior, guilting yourself, telling yourself there's something wrong with you, that isn't going to get you there. Other people telling you you're broken or wrong isn't going to get you there. What's going to get you there is doing the inner stuff, getting to the root of what caused your need for something on the outside of you in the first place. So if you are ready to do that, one, you can join me for my free Healing Addictions Masterclass on May the 5th at 8 p.m. UK time. You can register for free at lucysuperfox.com/heal. This is completely free, where I'm going to deep dive into the science, the chemistry, and the emotions of what drive addiction and how to move through it. Or you can dive straight in if you are ready to do that inner work, you're ready to do that inner processing. You can join me inside my one-to-one work or root cause therapy by going to lucysuperfox.com/RCT to find out more. So in the next episode, I'm going to be diving into what drives addiction, what creates addiction, and some of the problems with addiction in society and culture. So I hope you will join me on the future episodes, and I cannot wait to see you inside the Healing Addiction Masterclass if you are ready to make this the year that you finally heal from the behaviors, the patterns, and the programming that you feel is keeping you stuck. So any questions, feel free to leave them below. As always, I'd love a little like, a little comment, a little subscribe. It all makes a difference. And I'd love for you to share this with anybody that you know right now might be struggling with addictive behaviors, patterns, or tendencies. And I will see you on the next episode.